engines of economic growth, as well as being ethnic melting pots. So they are positive in a way, although when you look at them, particularly on films, on television, they look shabby, downhill, immense poverty, distress. People wouldn't go and live there if they were like that. I mean, don't misunderstand me, there is some desperation, of course there is. But I think the image that we must have of people moving into the cities in Africa is slightly different from the initial response that you might have of thinking of living in places that you would find uncomfortable to live in. What about the economies of sub-Saharan African countries? Many people still live within peasant societies. They produce what they eat. They are still within a mixture of a barter economy, although that economy is always having inroads of money into it. Migrants come home for a holiday, they bring money with them, the money economy is there. But that has been so since the 18th century, when not only coin, but say cowries in West Africa or other forms of currency were in circulation. And you can actually look at, say, the frontier of changing diet as goods were imported, and then you have tin foods imported, you have new crops that are grown and so on. So there's some fascinating historical data there to look at. Not easy of access, but it can be done. Besides being peasant economies, in part, they also are export economies. And 60% of Africa's external trade is in the commodities that it produces. Commodities like oil, iron ore, copper, rutile, and gold. And there's also agricultural produce. In West Africa, much of that has been historically, and still is, under what one could call peasant production. Cocoa, groundnuts, even cotton. One of the problems with having commodities for sale is that you are largely dependent on foreign markets. And if the price of your commodity on the international market falls, then that has a serious impact on the African economies. Let's start with oil. Oil is by and large an enclave economy. It's produced in a specific place. The Delta region of Nigeria, the coast and off the coast of Angola, Gabon, or southern Sudan. They become places of competition for scarce resources. That always happens. But they also become places that when commodity prices have fallen, as they have globally since 2013, push people into ethnic conflict sometimes, as you have in the Delta. People object to the way in which oil spills ruin their crops, or they say, we want a share of this, it's going off to Lagos to the oligarchs and we're being ignored. So that kind of economy can be a source of serious problems. Ghana is thinking of something like the Norwegians have, where you have a sort of social welfare fund into which oil revenues are paid, which are then used for the benefit of the whole community. But clearly what has happened as commodity prices have fallen, exports have also fallen as world demand for things like metals has gone down, oil has gone down. And it's probably likely to keep going down oil as we go for alternative sources of energy supply. Now, as soon as you have that kind of fall in commodity export prices, it knocks on into and impedes economic growth and investment. And investment in particularly important things such as infrastructure, road and rail system, transport systems, and also social welfare, which of course is vital. China has been one of the major investors and within Africa and also recipients of exports of raw materials, and particularly metals and oil from sub-Saharan Africa. And now that its economy is in slight decline, that has had a knock-on effect. And so halfway around the world, you not only get the effect of global prices falling for commodities, but you also get China demanding less. That, of course, affects sub-Saharan Africa's trade. It also affects its political stability. Now, in terms of development, which is the whole departments and universities that are concerned with development economics and largely focused on what the father of development economics was a West Indian, actually, Arthur Lewis, and lived in Britain, had the first chair of not first chair, but he had a chair of economic history at Manchester. Liverpool refused him a place because he was, as a teacher, because he was black. But Arthur Lewis, gentleman, was the father of development economics. He worked in Ghana. And it's now a huge growth industry with large numbers of people who do research in development economics. Where's the best place of looking at development economics? Well, it might be to go to, say, the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, but I think far more to go into an African village and see what Africans are doing for themselves. And a couple of years ago, I was in Kenya looking at some agricultural development that's being organised by people in the Anglican Diocese of Mount Kenya East. And someone said to me, well, he said, we used to meet, we still do, he said, for prayer and Bible study. And one of the questions that came up was, what are we doing for our community? How are we showing our Christian love to our neighbours? And so they started talking about that, and it came out of the prayer meeting and the Bible study. And they said, we must do something, but what can we do? And one of the things that they lit on was the idea that the village really needed a regular supply of water. You had seasonal water, and you had big tanks, which were breeding grounds for mosquitoes and so on, unless you kept them covered. How would we get it? They said, well, let's try and get water from the river, which is 20 miles away. And so, working on this through the diocese, the village